Hey, this is Mike from the Run Testers, and this is the new Garmin Fenix 8. And as you may have spotted there, it now includes an AMOLED display. Now, before we get into some initial running thoughts, and that will be from myself, Nick and Kieran, we'll take you through those key new details you need to know about the Fenix 8, how it compares to the Fenix 7, and shed a little bit of light on some of the new features and design kind of changes that Garmin has made here and why it has made those changes. So we'll get into why the Garmin Epix is no more. We'll also talk about why you might see a case size option missing from the Fenix range, and also get into those kind of key changes and what will ultimately be able to roll back or not roll back to the older Garmin watches as well. So this is our initial running take on the Garmin Fenix 8. Let's start with price, and with the Fenix 8 now coming in either AMOLED or solar versions, that does mean a jump in cost, with pricing starting from £949 or $999. In terms of design, you'll get the three usual case size options for the AMOLED Fenix and just the 47mm and 51mm for the solar Fenix. The missing 43mm solar Fenix is mainly due to the thickness that would be added by including the new solar charging technology, according to Garmin. There's also now a new Fenix E model, which sits at £799 or $799 and gets all the same software features as the Fenix 8. It does though feature an older optical heart rate sensor, comes in just a 47mm size case, and lacks the new leak-proof buttons, speaker and microphone. Those new leak-proof buttons are on all other models to make it better suited for recreational diving, with a brighter and clearer flashlight now in tow. In terms of new features, there's a new speaker and microphone to make calls over Bluetooth, talk to your phone's smart assistant, and can also be used to command your watch to do things like start tracking or check heart rate. There's also a new voice notes feature which can be geotagged. Garmin has overhauled the user interface to help declutter and makes features like mapping and navigation more glanceable. New dynamic round-trip routing feature to adjust created routes on the move if you need to abruptly change your course. It's also adding a new temporary touch mode to let you switch the touchscreen on before it disables again during workouts. Most of the new interface changes and mapping and navigation features won't be able to roll back to older Garmin's, as they are built on newer systems. Along with new strength training plans and programs you can follow, Garmin also introduces activity-specific workouts. So now you'll be able to see workouts best tailored for trail runners to add it into your training. When it comes to battery, you can expect big numbers across the board here, with the 51mm versions unsurprisingly offering the most impressive numbers.
I've been testing the Fenix 8 AMOLED 51mm model, the largest model, for the past 4 days so far. I've done 4 runs with it. I also wore the Epix Pro 51mm watch for about most of the last year and a bit, which was my main running watch for a long time. And in terms of the design, there's certainly a lot of similar features across the Fenix 8 and the Epix Pro. In terms of the size, the weight, the bright screen, it's a very familiar experience for me to put this watch on, having worn the Epix Pro for so long. And it's, it's a very nice design, very attractive design with a great screen. Garmin's added some new watch faces, which is nice. There's a lot more colours to pick from and stuff like that. I do think that is important. For a watch like this with a bright screen, it's nice for users, I think, to have a bit more choice in the customization you have there. Some small changes to the user interface as well, which are all quite nice, and just getting used to those as well. There's also some new buttons on this watch as well to make it dive proof. I would say I quite like the buttons. It's a slightly different sensation to pushing them down on other Garmin's, but it's not an unpleasant one. It's still very tactile and responsive, so the buttons are a nice little upgrade because you're getting that waterproofing without removing any functionality from the watch. The addition of the mic and the speaker, I think, is a nice touch. Like, it's not something that's going to be necessary for lots of people, but it is quite interesting to have it on the watch now. I did actually take a call on the watch at one point, almost by accident. I kind of forgot I'd already had it. Also use the voice commands to do things like set timers, which is something I do a lot with the Apple Watch. And it's nice to be able to do that with the Garmin Fenix. So yeah, it's a small but useful upgrade, I think, for lots of people. Obviously, the 51mm watch is a big watch and a heavy watch to have on the wrist, especially coming from the 4 and a 965 I was wearing before, but I was used to that a bit from using the Epix Pro for so long. What is quite interesting is that with the titanium 51mm Fenix 8, it is a fair bit heavier than the Enduro 3 if you're just looking at the cases, even though they are kind of the same size watch with similar materials. So I think Garmin's done well to make the Enduro 3 a lighter option than the Fenix. But overall, the design is certainly very familiar, and it's nice to have a flashlight back on my wrist again, which you don't get with the 4 and a 965. So as I mentioned, I've done 4 runs with the watch so far, and looking at the accuracy so far, the GPS has been really, really good, as you kind of expect from Garmin. I've used it in multi-band and auto select mode, and have had no concerns at all with the trails it's produced, the pacing I've seen compared to the 4 and a 965, and indeed the Enduro 3. I've had very similar information from all three watches, and looking at the GPS traces, they look pretty much spot on. The optical heart rate monitoring so far has been okay for me on easy runs, and on a long run I've not seen anything too glaring. I did do one hill session with the watch where I was doing 16 times 30-second reps up and down. I was wearing the Wahoo Tracker chest strap connected to my Forerunner 965, and that very clearly shows the up and downs of a session like that, which was missed a lot more by the optical tracking on the Fenix 8. It's kind of what I expect from optical tracking. I never found it that accurate for those kind of sessions for me, especially with a big heavy watch like this on my thin wrists. But like I say, on the easy runs, on the long run I did in the hills in Scotland, it was mostly pretty much in line with the heart rate chest strap. So far it's been more or less the usual story on optical tracking, but we'll do more testing on that. It has got the newest sensor, which I did find pretty good on the Epix Pro and the Garmin Fenix 7 Pro, but for the most part, I am someone who usually uses a heart rate chest strap, so I don't tend to get amazing results from optical heart rate tracking. Battery life, on the longest run I've done with the watch so far, which is 2 hours and 20 minutes, it drained at a rate of 2.67% an hour. I was looking at that on the DC Rainmaker Analyzer, which is a very handy tool. That would bounce out to around 37.5 hours of multi-band GPS tracking, which I think is pretty amazing for an AMOLED watch with the screen always on. Not sure what the exact battery figures are yet, and this early in testing, I would say most of the results taken with a little bit of a pinch of salt. I would prefer to do a couple of full charge cycles with the watch and see how it settles down a bit, but my overall impression so far is that, like the Epix Pro largest model, it's a very long lasting watch for an AMOLED watch. I've been wearing it at the same time as the Enduro 3, which I've been testing as well, and obviously the Fenix 8 AMOLED is draining faster than that watch, but it's not draining that much faster either in runs or outside of runs. And I do think these AMOLED watches, especially one as big as this, are getting very, very good in terms of battery life. And I've had the screen always on as well the whole time, not just during activities. I think if you turn that to raise to wake outside of your runs, you are going to see a lot of battery life from this watch, but we'll talk a lot more about that in the full review.
So in terms of my running time and experiences with the Fenix 8 so far, I've had it for a few days, managed to do a couple of runs, play around with some of the features, the new features that are here, and ultimately get a sense of what Garmin has got here with this latest Fenix. Now, I've got the 51mm version, I've got the AMOLED display version. Now, I have used the Garmin Fenix 7 and 7 Pro, I've used the Epix Gen 2 and the Epix Pro, but I haven't used the Epix Pro 51mm version, which effectively this is going to replace. Now, having a big display, a big AMOLED screen, color screen, is very nice. Ultimately, overall, it's nice and bright, it's vibrant, the colors are accurate. It's a very good quality AMOLED screen. It's very responsive to touch. All the things that we've seen from Garmin's AMOLED screen so far are really retained here on the Fenix 51mm version. There are some changes in terms of the design, in terms of the buttons. Obviously, those are design changes that are designed to make it a better fit for kind of recreational divers. So that's not going to be something that's going to really be a massive concern to me. But in terms of those buttons being still very easy to use, and the preference being having more physical buttons as well as that touchscreen display, those are all good things for me. So yeah, from a design point of view, all seems pretty straightforward for me in terms of my experience. In terms of the running performance, now, as I said, I've done a couple of runs so far. My first one was a kind of a relatively up-tempo 10K with it, and I used it against the Garmin Forerunner 965 in its kind of top multi-band mode, and I used that with Garmin's HRM Pro chest strap monitor to test the heart rate monitoring accuracy. From a GPS point of view, it largely matched up in terms of distance tracking, in terms of that kind of average pace, all the kind of things I expect to see. But that kind of raw data looks generally pretty good to me. The heart rate data wasn't fantastic. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it definitely didn't match up to a heart rate monitor chest strap that I was testing it against. It was mainly on the average heart rate readings where, and particularly if you look at the graphs, it looks like there's a little bit more of a dip there. And just, generally what I expect to see from a bigger kind of Garmin watch in general, that's kind of my experience. So the optical sensors seem to struggle a little bit more for me compared to the smaller Garmin watches and those optical sensors. So yeah, a little bit of a difference there in terms of that. I had a little bit of a play around with the mapping as well, looking at how the maps kind of are presented, and that all looks very good. There's a lot happening in terms of the overhaul of the user interface here, which has been starting to happen or has kind of evolved or been, kind of introduced in other Garmin watches, and now it's coming to the Fenix 8 and obviously the Enduro 3 as well too. I definitely think I'm a bit on the fence in terms of the changes with the UI now, where you're pulling in or giving a better kind of prominence to the apps in the kind of activity tracking screen, where the activity tracking screen or the activity kind of jump off is at the top of the screen. I think when you get into that screen and then you want to, generally I would go and look through my training sessions or, my navigation features. It's not as straightforward. I think I'm still playing around and getting used to how that ultimately works. It's definitely easier to kind of swipe through data fields before you get moving. Look at your music controls, but in terms of maybe accessing those workout training navigation features that you would normally do from that screen, I'm not sure I'm convinced about the changes on that front. So yeah, those are definitely some things I'm definitely going to work on in terms of my experience so far. Obviously, one of the big features here is the improved voice features. You're getting a microphone and speaker here, which we've seen on other Garmin watches. Now, those are going to be used for the same types of things, so letting you make phone calls, letting you access your smartphone assistant, but there's a couple of extra features that are really kind of specific to the Fenix range. So having the ability to do geotagged kind of voice notes, and you can only really listen to them on the watch. It doesn't save with your kind of, activity summary just yet. I think that is going to come. I think that is the plan ultimately. And then you have those kind of phone-free kind of voice commands, which allow you to kind of start tracking, ask for your heart rate, things we've kind of seen in other, smartwatches ultimately, which gives you shortcuts to features on your watch. So those are potentially could be nice features for people. The flashlight is, I know everyone loves the flashlight. That's been kind of slightly adjusted in terms of the brightness, just being, having less of a tint and just being a little bit clearer. So if that's something that you were looking for from the flashlight on the new Fenix, that is ultimately what you're going to get. In terms of the battery life performance, I think, I've done 2 runs so far. I did that 10K run, and I did a kind of longer 2-hour run next to the Enduro 3 and its kind of multi-band kind of mode as well, also using some of its routing and navigation features that are also available here on the Fenix 8. What I found from that same 2-hour run, I saw a drop of 5%, and it was kind of 6% on the Enduro 3. I was probably playing around a little bit more settings on that watch for that run, but for me that feels like that's a pretty good performance, and I think that's kind of what we saw with the 51mm version of the Epix Pro. It really has shown it's pushing those numbers in terms of that battery performance. I am seeing a bit of a bigger drop off compared to the Enduro 3 day to day, and that's kind of what I expect to see because it's an AMOLED display, and I have been using it in the kind of raise to wake mode, so not the always on display. I will be looking at that further into testing, but in terms of battery performance, that's pretty good showing, I would say, off 2 hours of running. So yeah, I think there's some interesting kind of new features here on the Garmin Fenix 8. I think the core tracking looks pretty good to me. The battery life looks good as well. I think the interface changes, I think those are going to be things that I'm going to definitely have to get used to. But generally, an interesting first few days with the Garmin Fenix 8.
So I've got the Garmin Fenix 8 AMOLED Solar 51mm in for testing. Quick word on design. It's a great looking watch, straight out of the box, beautiful to look at. It's big, rugged, shiny, classically Fenix. I'm a fan of the kind of silver titanium frame here and the orange flashes. I like the colour of the band actually. I would prefer a nylon strap. You can kind of choose those, I think, when you purchase. It's a heavy old watch, not for the dainty wristed, but that is classic kind of Fenix stuff. I find the buttons really pleasing to use. There's almost a spring to them with a small vibration for feedback. It's a small thing, but it just feels good. It feels nice. The interaction feels good. The screen is excellent as well. It really brings your metrics, maps, all of those tools to life. It's a marked step up from the regular screen that you would get on the old Fenix or in fact the Enduro 3. I still think it's a nice to have rather than a must have, but it is great. The touchscreen is responsive. It's rapid when you're scrolling, tapping and swiping through the screens. There's no lag here so far, for me anyway. I found it really nice to use. This watch ticks all of the design boxes that you get with the Fenix. And if you like that, then I think you're just gonna like this just the same. There's an important interface change here. When you hit the top right button on your Garmin, it usually takes you to your list of sport modes. Now you're gonna land on a screen with activities as an option above a list of other tools that you can customize for quick access to maps, phone, music, things like that. So there's an extra click here to get to your run, but it's easier to dip into those other things and work with those. It's another nod though that Garmin is moving in the smartwatch direction. The addition of the mic, the speaker for calls, feels like a big step for Garmin. It really feels like they're quickening the pace with those smartwatch skills to close that gap on Apple and the other classic smartwatches. Our running watches are going to get smarter. The voice commands tool is very clever, though you can't summon like you can with Siri. You have to tap a few buttons to get there. I'm not sure it's much faster or easier than doing it manually, but I do kind of like it in theory. Garmin is taking big strides here. Voice notes I think are cool too. I've always wanted a way to record those kind of bonkers thoughts and the clever ideas that pop into your head halfway around a run that you think, I'm always going to remember those when I get back, and then the minute you stop, they're gone. You've now got that option here.
I've got this great idea that I've come up with during my run that I always forget. I always think I'm going to remember it, but I never do.
I've got this great idea that I've come up with during my run that I always forget. I always think I'm going to remember it, but I never do.
The screen here is also absolutely stunning.
So when it comes to battery life, in the very limited testing so far that I've done, here's what I found. In 2 days, I've burned around 14% general usage. That includes 3 hours of GPS running. An average overnight burn was 1 to 2%. That's how much it was leaching whilst I was asleep. A 90-minute run in normal mode burned 3%, while a 90-minute run in max accuracy mode, also interestingly, burned 3% as well.
Again, when it comes to GPS and heart rate accuracy, we've had limited testing time, so these are just some initial findings from a couple of early runs.
So GPS then, we've got the Garmin Fenix 8 in purple, we've got the Garmin Enduro 3 in the turquoise, and we've got the Garmin Enduro 2 strapped to a waistband, so it shouldn't do as well in the brown. Overall on this run, it's not particularly tricky, it's not hugely built up, and actually most of them perform really well. They track quite closely, they are going a little bit wide in places here as I do some crossings, but it's got me on the paths pretty nicely. It's got me on the right side of the road for a lot of it. Yeah, mainly these are quite good. It has cut off a little bit going on to Kew Bridge. I'm going to swing you over here to one of the bits that I often do just to see how it copes, which is a big underpass. This is a series of sort of tunnels under the big road here in West London. And as you can see, none of them have handled this particularly. There's a little down and it sort of switches across and then there's a little switchback, but they've all gone pretty haywire there. Nothing has coped particularly well. Maybe the Garmin Enduro 3 has coped a little better than the Fenix 8. But overall, with this performance, I'm pretty pleased with how these have all done with that max accuracy mode. They've stuck pretty closely. There isn't too much out of hand here. They all look pretty solid. So yeah, on GPS, I would say that's a pretty good performance. So let's have a quick look at the chart for the heart rate for a 7-mile run. There was a bit of a mixed pace in here. A lot of it quite easy, but there was a few shifts in gear. We've got the Garmin Enduro 3 in the turquoise. We've got the Garmin Fenix 8 in the purple. And then we've got the H10 paired to a Garmin Enduro 2 in the brown. I think the Garmin Fenix 8 here, it kind of does. There are moments where it's riding higher than the chest strap. Initially in this beginning period, you can see that it was reading, a good sort of 10 beats per minute, if not more, higher than the chest strap. But actually after that, there's good broad agreement here. And I think the Garmin Fenix 8 does a good job of tracking the chest strap, actually much better than the Garmin Enduro 3, which struggles from time to time. But there's broad agreement overall with the Garmin Fenix 8 optical right the way through. Maybe a few little bits here. In this section here, I actually stopped and had a chat with a friend that I bumped into. As you can see, as I get going again, the Garmin Fenix 8 and the Enduro struggle to pick up that kind of start in activity again. You can often get that when you start runs from optical heart rate sensors. They tend to sort of take a while to settle down. But overall, I think the performance here for the Fenix 8 is pretty solid. It looks to me from this one that it's slightly better than the Garmin Enduro 3 as well.
First impressions then, well, this is unmistakably Fenix. Garmin hasn't messed with the fundamentals of big rugged design, comprehensive range of features and insights, and a good balance of battery life that's enough to suit most runners. When it comes to tracking insights and navigation, if Garmin tracks it or has a tool for it, it's on this watch, as you'd expect for that premium price. There are some really interesting updates here as well, though. The big change obviously being that large AMOLED display. It's only a matter of time before that rolled from the Epix over onto the Fenix. And it really punches up all of your stats and the maps and navigation tools. I don't think you miss it necessarily until you've experienced it or you've used it. I've been using it side by side, and when you do that, you kind of see the difference over the Enduro. But I personally wouldn't feel the urge to upgrade if I already owned a Fenix 6 or 7 just for the screen, but that's me. But what's most interesting here, I think, is that Garmin's watches have been getting smarter with each generation, and this Fenix 8 takes some bigger steps in the smartwatch direction for sure, with those voice commands, calls via a connected phone, and messaging to other Garmin users. Accuracy so far in terms of GPS and heart rate seems solid, but more on that in the full review. Battery life also looks to be nicely long. There's a notable shift in price though, and whether the new bells and whistles stack up to that extra outlay over the previous generation Fenix watches or an Epix, that's something that I'm really keen to challenge for our full review, but much more testing is needed before we give that verdict.
Early impressions of the watch is it's another very strong top of the line Garmin watch. I think it's probably the right thing to bring the Epix line under the Fenix name. It should have just always been that, I'd say. Like, to have an AMOLED and then a solar charging memory and pixel option under the Fenix name is a little bit clearer probably than bringing another watch name into the fray, although it's now a little bit, you know, muddied by the fact they did have the Epix and now have the Fenix E AMOLED. But, you know, it's a really good watch. Some updates here that will be very important to some people and not necessarily that important to other people. So if you really need the mic and speaker, or the new dive waterproofing, then obviously this is the one to get, and it is a little bit better than the previous models, but I think a lot of the experience is very similar to what you have on the Epix Pro, and even actually looking back to the Epix 2 that doesn't have a flashlight or the different size options, which obviously might be a big thing for some people. I really like the flashlight myself, but at the same time, the Epix 2 still has the core features, the bright screen, the really nice design, you know, lots of software updates have happened to that watch, and I think that's going to be the better value option for someone looking for a top of the line Garmin with an AMOLED screen. I mean, looking at the prices of these top Garmins these days, you know, it's really, really high, and I think there's always going to be better value to be found on looking at older models in sales and that kind of thing. But if you do want the latest and greatest and you're coming from upgrading from an older Fenix, then the Fenix E AMOLED is a nice little update on the previous watch. If you're just looking at like the core features, especially for runners who don't need a flashlight or a bigger watch, which, you know, are nice things to have, especially the extra battery life, the Epix 2 I think will give you a lot of that at a lower price. But we'll talk a lot more about this kind of thing in the verdict of our full review in a few weeks.
So some initial thoughts on the Garmin Fenix 8, and I would say it is, like a lot of Fenix watches, a lot to take in. There's a lot of features here, there's a lot going on, but I think from a kind of core run tracking experience, it looks all very good to me so far, from a kind of GPS, heart rate monitoring, and a kind of battery life side of things. I think, you know, the heart rate monitoring doesn't look massively improved for me, but, you know, obviously you're always going to have that ability to pair an external sensor here. I think when you look at some of the kind of software changes, which a lot has happened here, I think I'm definitely getting to grips with the kind of changes in the interface and whether I think those are for the better or whether maybe things didn't need to be changed. But I think I'm definitely kind of on the fence with that so far. And then obviously, you know, a lot of the things, kind of the routing, the mapping, navigation, the voice features, are those worth that kind of extra spend over the kind of previous version Fenix watches and also the Epix as well too? I think what I'm feeling is when you look at the price, you look at what you're getting, I think there is an argument to say you could still go for the older Garmin Epix Pro, even the Garmin Epix Gen 2, get a really strong experience. I think go for that multi-band version if you know, one that has a multi-band support and has that kind of, I think particularly a bigger size, which is going to give you that better battery life from an AMOLED kind of Garmin. Obviously there is still the Garmin 40965. It doesn't have that rugged kind of design, but it still gives you that good AMOLED experience and the kind of core running experience that is very good and solid overall. Just not going to give you that level of battery life that you're going to get on these Fenix watches. As I said, it is a very expensive watch. You really have to be sold on all of those features, and I think ultimately if you didn't massively care about the speaker and microphone, I think if you didn't care about some of the kind of extra routing kind of features, navigation features, because ultimately what Garmin has said is that a lot of the kind of graphical kind of interface things, some of the routing, navigation things that they've introduced here won't be able to roll back to the older Garmins because ultimately it's built on new code, it's built on a new system. Now, the other watch that does offer that support is the Fenix E. Now, the Fenix E doesn't support the same, or doesn't offer you the same hardware, so not the same heart rate sensor, not the same kind of in terms of that kind of size options that you're going to get on the Fenix watches. The display as well, it doesn't quite match up, but in terms of that core software performance, it's going to be the same, and that's sitting at the price of things like the Apple Watch Ultra, which may be a reason to go for that watch if you really don't want to spend that big money and still want an AMOLED Garmin. But I think if you want all those features, then ultimately you're going to have to pay for it here. And I think from what it looks like, you are going to get a strong experience. Whether those extras over the previous versions really are going to make a massive difference in terms of experience and make it worth that upgrade, that's definitely something to be decided as yet. But so far, I've had a good few days with the Garmin Fenix 8, and the AMOLED version, the 51mm version, is very nice to wear, and you've got a lovely AMOLED screen on there, which I've enjoyed using and interacting with so far. Okay, so there you have it, some initial thoughts on the Garmin Fenix 8. Obviously, plenty more tech to do. We've only had it for a few days. We haven't had access to that Garmin Connect app as well. And there is a lot going on that Garmin has really tweaked here with its newest Fenix. Now, if you've got any questions about the Fenix 8 or the Fenix E or anything else that we've spoken about in this video, do let us know in the comments. As always, like and subscribe, hit that little bell to find out about our latest videos. And yeah, we'll see you for the next fan tested video.